Hello and welcome. I'm Esther Snippa from Speaker Hub, and today I'm interviewing a communications specialist named Gareth Harding. In this series of interviews, we feature our VIP speakers. They talk to us about their passions and projects, as well as share ideas on how to become better speakers and communicators. Gareth is the founder of Clear Europe, a company which specializes in media training. Today he talks with us about the current problems that many professionals face when it comes to communicating essential ideas within the EU, and why focusing on creating engaging content is key in the information age. Okay, so just to start us off, Gareth, can you tell us a bit about the topics you speak about?
I speak mainly about the European Union from a political point of view, dealing with issues like identity, general political issues, but also increasingly about communications and the way that the European Union communicates, or miscommunicates, in my opinion, and specifically the Brussels media and the way it operates. So those would be some of my specialties. So I'm drawing on my political background because I studied politics, I worked in the House of Commons in Britain, I've worked in the European Parliament, European Commission. I'm a political animal. Political junkie, if you want. So I know about the EU and can explain it well. So that would be my primary interest. But as I said, having been a journalist for about 12 years covering the EU, I also know from the inside what it's like to report it, the challenges of reporting the European Union, and also the problems of trying to communicate it from an institutional point of view.
And what are the biggest issues? What are you looking to change?
Well, again, I think the biggest issues for me when it comes to communications is how to connect with people. I think the EU is failing to do that. And it's part of the reasons why I think that there's increasing Euroscepticism. I don't think it's all down to communication. I think when the product is wrong, it doesn't matter what sort of public relations or advertising you do to try and sell it. It will never be bought by consumers, by the public. And I think there's a lot of problems with the product which has been offered. But more to the point, I think that there's really deep problems with the way that the EU is being communicated by the institutions, and to a certain extent, the way it's been reported by journalists as well.
And how can they improve it? What can they do to fix the problem?
Well, I think the EU, for one, and I'm talking generally, but I'm primarily focusing on the Commission, which is largely responsible for most of the EU's communications efforts, needs to get a lot more professional. I think, frankly, if it was a private company, it would have probably sacked the entire communication team by now. And probably the CEO and most of senior management as well, because it's clearly not performing. No matter how you measure it, the EU is failing to connect with its citizens and get its message across and, frankly, win the argument. It is losing the argument now to Eurosceptics, xenophobes and populists across the continent. And especially in my own country, of course, where there's a strong likelihood that we could actually leave the European Union. So it's failed to make its case. And I think partly, as I said, that's due to unprofessional communications and partly due to simply getting the message wrong and not being in touch with a population who are perhaps not as enthusiastic about greater EU integration as many people in this town.
Gareth, can you expand a little bit on the professionalism that the EU is lacking?
Yes, I think if you look at the way they draft press releases, it's almost, I use them in my media training as examples of how not to write press releases. The news lines are buried, the headlines are usually too long and unintelligible, they're riddled with jargon. Then if you look at some of their corporate videos, it's very often, quite frankly, naff. They're either just not funny or they're too propagandistic. So I think the EU, especially the Commission again, often confuses information with propaganda.
Okay.
And propaganda is bad communications. It's unbelievable. And people are very off-put by that. You can't just go around saying the EU is wonderful, rah, rah, rah. That just doesn't fly. That's brutal, old-fashioned propaganda or 20th century advertising. I think now you need to enter into dialogue with people, have a conversation. And again, the EU, I think, is failing to do that.
Okay, can you tell us a bit about Clear Europe?
So I set the company up 2.5 years ago. We launched publicly in late 2013. And the aim again was to help Europe communicate better and to help communication professionals have the skills to communicate better. I think we all need to constantly upskill. We can't just think that studies stop at 21 or 22 when we finish university, and the rest of the life we can just luxuriate in the knowledge we learned in those early years, especially now with changes, technology and digital communications. We have to constantly upskill. So I saw a kind of niche in the market for providing media, journalism and communication training. And that's what we largely focus on. But moving more and more into copywriting, editing and corporate writing, content, really, because there's so little really good content being produced in this town, apart from by journalists, of course. A lot of the people doing writing and communications in Brussels, which is still our primary market, don't know how to write. They're often economists or lawyers, who's nothing wrong with that, but their ultimate aim is to become EU officials. So there's no reason why they should be great communicators and great writers. So I draw on a team of really professional writers, journalists, communicators and media trainers to either advise on how to communicate better or to actually do the work and produce the content for them.
And when you're offering this advice, how do you take a professional, say a lawyer or an advocate, and take them from the one level and bring them up to a place where their communication is at a higher level?
Actually, it's usually not a case of bringing them up, but bringing them down.
Okay.
One of the big problems in Brussels is, frankly, people are overeducated. Well, there's what I call the curse of knowledge. They know an incredible amount. They are very, very well educated, super cosmopolitan. They speak loads of languages, but they often can't communicate on even the most basic level because they fail to understand that others are either not as knowledgeable or not as interested in the topic as they are. So there's a real problem with experts, often bureaucrats, but also researchers, civil servants, sometimes even politicians, of getting caught up in very, very complicated jargon, being unable to explain what they do clearly, get their message right. And that's where we help. We certainly, as a journalistic skill, is to be able to simplify masses of information, often complex information, and make it digestible for people who know very little about a subject. So that's the core skill we provide, which I think is often sadly lacking in this town.
So you've talked about simple messages, but what are some of the other ways that people can make their content more digestible for the general audience?
One way of making messages more digestible or content more interesting is to make full use of multimedia. Again, I don't see too much of that around. The internet and new technologies have given us incredible tools to produce really vivid, interesting, attention-grabbing content, whether it's podcasts or infographics, or short videos, or merging them all together into real multimedia products. But I still think we're very siloed in producing print publications or producing pretty dull websites. So I think multimedia, making full use of multimedia, again, which is something we train people on, how to use social media to a full extent, is one way of doing that. Other ways, I think, is just trying to have a little bit of a lighter touch.
Hmm.
Use humor occasionally to grab people. Don't always sort of approach even serious subjects in such a serious way that it frankly becomes boring. You cannot afford to be boring in today's world because people have the power in their hands to zap, to swipe, to delete, to junk, to get rid of you very, very quickly. They're inundated with information. They have hundreds of thousands of other possibilities of stuff to read or videos to view or tweets to scroll through. So there's no reason they should be paying any attention to you unless you can give them a really strong reason to do so. And you can do that by, one, being very clear about what it is you want to say and who you want to say it to, and then grabbing that audience by connecting with them, showing that what you're saying is relevant to them in their daily lives. That's the key.
And I think you've touched on a great subject there of making things relevant to the audience. Sometimes this is where we have that big disconnect. You have all of this information, but it's not necessarily relevant. So how can speakers or content creators make their content really relevant?
Well, you have to connect. E.M. Forster, the great British novelist, said, only connect. And that's, in a way, our motto. Have to find some way of connecting with your audience. Is it through a personal anecdote they'll be able to relate to? Is it by showing that their air they breathe is going to be cleaner, or taxes are going to go down, or better schools and hospitals are going to be built by this piece of legislation? That's how you connect with people. It's not by saying, we've passed this piece of legislation, rah, rah, rah. That doesn't connect with anyone. To make information relevant, you have to show the effects and the changes and what this means for people in their daily lives. And then they'll find some way of connecting.
Gareth, can you tell me what future do you see for the EU if we could improve communication to a level where the speakers were connecting on a very real level with their audiences? What would be the effect?
Well, I think communication can only play a small role at the end of the day. I'm realistic enough to know that even the best communication and advertising, public relations, is ultimately not going to sell a product which people don't want to buy. And I think the EU's problems are more fundamental than communication. In my personal opinion, I think that it went too far and too fast and left the people behind it. In fact, it almost forgot it had a people it was answerable and responsible to. There were a small clique of politicians, largely based in Brussels, who decided this was the way Europe should go without really consulting properly with the people. And lo and behold, when the people find out that large chunks of their sovereignty had been taken away from them, or pooled, as they say in Brussels, many of them were not happy about that. I think people owe their primary loyalty to the nation state, or to their region, to their community, not to fictitious identity, European identity. And I don't see that that's fundamentally changed.
Okay, and communication, that's not really going to make too big of a difference if, in the end, the product isn't what people want.
No, I mean, the communication can help. Better communication would certainly help the EU get its message across. But as I said, fundamental problem with communication is not how you communicate, but what you're communicating. If you've got the message wrong, it doesn't matter how good you are as a communicator. People won't buy your message.
Okay, that's very insightful. Thanks for sharing that with us. Last question today. What's coming up for you in 2016?
Well, as a company, we want to concentrate much more on content. I think one of the mistakes we made, and we've made many mistakes as a young startup, one should, of course, is focusing probably too much on old-fashioned marketing. Whereas I think the future is really producing good content to show that you can actually do what you're talking about. So we want to produce better, clearer writing, videos, infographics, any form of content which can tell stories better. In addition to our core focus on training. And in that respect, a lot of writing training. We're seeing a lot of demand for clear writing and a lot of social media training, plus video training, because now people are realizing, frankly, with an iPhone, you can produce videos. We want to show them how to do that professionally, so that they can have great images for their websites. So those are a couple of things we're looking forward to in 2016.
Well, it's been very interesting to talk to you about the value of content. I agree with a lot of your points that in the new world of information, that having great content is going to go a long way. So thank you for sharing your insights and
No
ideas
problem.
with me today.
All right, no problem.
And to you, audience, thanks for listening. If you have any questions or comments about this interview or what you've just heard, we'd love to connect. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at SpeakerHub HQ. Lastly, if you'd like to listen to some more of the interviews we've done with our VIP speakers, please visit us at www.speakerhub.com.